Part 1. Robert Johnson. The Mississippi Delta in late summer was thick with heat that clung to the skin and slowed the breath. The air carried the smell of damp earth, cheap liquor, and sweat from long days in the fields. In this place, music was not entertainment. It was survival. It was how people emptied their pain into the night. This was the world Robert Johnson moved through during his final days, drifting from town to town, sleeping where he could, playing wherever someone would listen. Robert Johnson was already a ghost while he was alive. He owned almost nothing. He carried his guitar, his voice, and his reputation. People said he appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as fast. He played in juke joints, on street corners, at house parties that lasted until dawn. His music sounded older than he was, as if it came from a place deeper than personal experience. Musicians who heard him knew they were standing in front of something unnatural. Decades later, those songs would become the foundation of rock and roll, copied, studied, and worshipped by artists across the world. But in the Delta, talent did not protect you. It made you a target. The legend followed him everywhere. The story of the crossroads. A young man with no skill who disappeared, then returned able to make a guitar cry and snarl like a living thing. People whispered that he had gone to the crossing of Highway 61 and Highway 49 at midnight. That he met a dark figure who tuned his guitar and claimed his soul in exchange for mastery. Whether metaphor or myth, the story fit Johnson too well. His songs spoke openly about hell, hounds, and death on his trail. He sang like someone who believed the clock was already ticking. On a humid night near Greenwood, he walked into a small dance hall not far from Three Forks. The room was crowded. Smoke hung low. People were drinking corn whiskey from bottles passed hand to hand. Johnson played as he always did, confident, sharp, aware of the effect he had on the room. He noticed a woman watching him closely. He played to her. He smiled. He leaned into the attention. This was not unusual. Women were drawn to him, and he rarely turned that attention away. What he did not see was the men standing back in the shadows. The woman was married. Her husband watched quietly as Johnson sang and flirted without concern. In places like this, there were no authorities to settle personal disputes. Respect was handled directly. Sometimes with fists. Sometimes with blades. Sometimes in quieter ways. A bottle of whiskey appeared. The cap was already off. Someone handed it toward Johnson. Accounts differ on who delivered it, whether it was the husband himself or someone acting on his behalf. What matters is what was inside. The whiskey had been mixed with strychnine, a chemical commonly used at the time to kill rats and other pests. It was bitter, but the burn of cheap alcohol could mask the taste. Another musician was there that night. Sonny Boy Williamson. He noticed the open bottle. He sensed something wrong. According to his later account, he knocked the bottle from Johnson's hand and warned him never to drink from an open bottle. Johnson was furious. Pride flared. He felt challenged in front of the room. He snapped back, telling Sonny Boy never to interfere with his drink. When another open bottle was offered shortly after, Johnson grabbed it and drank. For a short while, nothing happened. He kept playing. The music went on. But the poison was already working its way through his body, attacking the nervous system. Strychnine does not kill quickly. It causes violent muscle contractions, locking the body into waves of pain. Johnson began to falter. His hands stiffened. His voice broke off. He collapsed. Witnesses later described severe convulsions, his body arching uncontrollably. Foam formed at his mouth as his muscles seized again and again. There was nothing anyone could do. No doctor. No treatment. Only waiting. He lingered for days, suffering in full awareness, before his body finally gave out. He was 27 years old. When the death was recorded, the truth disappeared. The certificate listed syphilis as the cause. It was a common label used for unexplained deaths among poor black men in the Delta. There was no investigation. No charges. The men believed to have poisoned him lived out his life without consequence. Johnson was buried in a simple pine box. Even now, no one knows exactly where. 3 different cemeteries in Mississippi claim his grave. It is as if he slipped back into the earth the same way he moved through life, leaving no fixed point behind. What remained were fewer than 30 recorded songs. Crackling, rough, and haunting. Music that sounds like a warning. His death became the first chapter of what would later be called the 27 Club, a pattern people would point to whenever another brilliant artist died young. Whether coincidence or myth, Johnson became the origin. His story sits at the intersection of jealousy, ego, and legend. A man killed not by a blade or a bullet, but by trust. By a drink handed over with a smile. It raises questions that refuse to fade. Was his death simply the result of human envy, or did the legend grow because people needed to believe a talent like his could not exist without a price? As you sit with this story, consider which part feels most disturbing, the jealousy, the ignored warning, or the way the truth was quietly erased. The next chapter moves from a dusty Delta dance hall to the polished hills of Hollywood, where another bright life faded under far stranger circumstances. Part 2, Brittany Murphy. Hollywood Hills in the final days of that year felt calm on the surface. Palm trees stood still. Gates were closed. Behind them lived a woman the public still saw as light itself. Brittany Murphy was known for laughter that spilled out of scenes and a voice that carried warmth even in silence. She was not fading. She was preparing to return. Scripts were coming in again. Music projects waited. To the outside world, the story was one of renewal. Inside the house, the rhythm was different. Brittany had grown thin. Friends noticed she tired easily. She canceled appearances. She sounded distant on the phone. Illness became routine. Colds lingered. Breathing felt heavy. Instead of hospitals, there was rest at home. Instead of open access to doctors, there was a single channel of care. Her husband, Simon Monjack, stood between her and the outside world. He managed schedules, visitors, medications, explanations. Those close to her later said she felt watched. She said she felt like something was wrong with her body in a way she could not explain. She did not sound dramatic. She sounded frightened. On a rainy morning in December, she collapsed in the bathroom. The space was small. Cold tile. The place where people are most unguarded. She struggled to breathe. Her lips turned blue. Paramedics arrived too late. She was pronounced dead inside her own home. She was young. The official cause listed pneumonia combined with severe anemia. A tragic convergence of illness, according to the report. The world accepted it. Vigils were held. Tributes poured in. The story closed quickly. It did not stay closed. Months later, the same house became a crime scene again. Simon Monjack collapsed in the same place. Same room. Same symptoms. Difficulty breathing. Sudden failure. He died before help could save him. The cause of death matched Brittany's. Pneumonia. Severe anemia. 2 people. 1 house. 1 room. A narrow window of time. Doctors will say coincidence exists. Statisticians will say probability matters. In this case, probability collapses under its own weight. 2 unrelated adults dying from the same non-contagious condition, in the same location, within months, is almost unheard of. The house became the silent witness. Questions followed. Why did both bodies shut down in the same way? Why did illness advance so fast? Why did no one outside the house intervene sooner? Why did one person survive? That survivor was Brittany's mother. She had lived in the home with them. She shared meals. She shared air. Yet she did not become ill. She did not suffer respiratory collapse. She did not develop anemia. She walked out of the story alive, holding 2 death certificates and a lifetime of suspicion. Brittany's father refused to accept the explanation. Estranged in life, relentless in death, he demanded evidence. Years later, he obtained a sample of Brittany's hair and sent it to an independent laboratory. Hair records exposure over time. It remembers what blood forgets. The results were explosive. Elevated levels of multiple heavy metals were found far beyond accepted safety limits. Substances associated with industrial toxins and poisons. Substances not explained by diet or environment in small amounts. To the father, the conclusion was obvious. Someone had introduced toxic elements into his daughter's body over time. Slowly. Quietly. Enough to weaken her immune system. Enough to let a common infection become fatal. Authorities dismissed the findings. They claimed hair products could explain contamination. Styling chemicals. Sprays. Dye. The lab countered that cosmetic exposure could not account for the levels detected. Two narratives formed. Science versus authority. Evidence versus closure. Another explanation emerged. Black mold. The house had a history. Previous owners complained of illness. There were reports of water damage and poor ventilation. Mold spores can cause respiratory distress. They can mimic pneumonia. They can exhaust the body. It sounded reasonable. It sounded clean. An environmental killer leaves no fingerprints. Lawsuits followed, then vanished. Claims were filed, then quietly withdrawn. Inspections were mentioned, but reports were never made fully public. Mold, however, does not explain heavy metals. Mold does not cause identical anemia patterns. Mold does not selectively spare one person in the same environment. The house theory soothed fear, but it left gaps wide enough to walk through. Then there was the human angle. Simon Monjack was deeply in debt. He controlled access to Brittany. He spoke for her. He filtered information. Some friends described him as protective. Others described him as controlling. There were whispers of medications mixed without clarity. Prescriptions stacked together. Illness managed behind closed doors. No charges were filed. No case was reopened. The system moved on. What remains is geometry. 3 people lived in that house. 2 died in the same way. 1 did not. That fact does not assign guilt. It assigns unease. Brittany Murphy died trying to recover. She did not overdose. She did not live recklessly in her final months. She rested. She followed instructions. She trusted the people around her. If toxic exposure occurred, it was subtle. If neglect occurred, it was quiet. If harm occurred, it wore the mask of care. Her story sits in the space where medical language ends and human doubt begins. A bright presence dimmed not by spectacle, but by suffocation and silence. Her name is now tied forever to a house on a hill that refuses to give clear answers. As this chapter ends, think about which explanation feels most convincing to you and why. The next part leaves Hollywood behind and travels across the ocean to a hotel room in Seoul, where a rising star was found with evidence that defies physical logic. Part 3, Kim Sung-jae. Seoul in the mid-1990s was changing fast. Neon signs reflected on wet streets. Music shows were no longer just entertainment. They were national events. Kim Sung-jae stood at the center of that moment. He was young, disciplined, and different from anyone before him. Loose clothing, sharp movement, and a confidence that felt imported from another future. He was not just popular. He represented a new direction. That night was supposed to seal it. His solo debut aired on national television. Millions watched. The performance was precise and electric. Viewers saw a star stepping out of a group identity and into his own name. Industry executives saw money. Fans saw destiny. When the broadcast ended, the tension dropped. Applause faded into relief. Kim returned to his hotel with a sense of victory. He had crossed the line every artist dreams of crossing. The hotel room was quiet. Familiar. Safe. Or so it seemed. Later that night, he spent time with his girlfriend. According to her account, nothing felt wrong. He was tired. He lay down. She said she left while he slept. Hours later, staff knocked on the door. There was no response. When they entered, the room had changed from a place of celebration into a frozen scene. Kim Sung-jae was dead. At first, authorities leaned toward a medical explanation. Exhaustion. Stress. Possible substance use. The usual language used when young celebrities die without witnesses. That explanation collapsed during the examination. Doctors found numerous needle marks on his right arm. Not one. Not two. Many. Counted carefully. 28 separate punctures. All clustered along the same limb. This detail changed everything. Kim Sung-jae was right-handed. Basic mechanics matter. A person cannot easily inject their own dominant arm using that same hand. The angle is wrong. The grip fails. Control disappears. Doing it once would be difficult. Repeating it many times moves from unlikely to physically impossible. This was not a matter of opinion. It was anatomy. Toxicology deepened the mystery. The substance in his system was not a recreational drug. It was a veterinary anesthetic. A chemical used to sedate animals for procedures. It was not prescribed to humans. It was not sold casually. It required access and intent. Questions turned toward access. Investigators traced the drug to a local pharmacy. A pharmacist recalled a purchase days earlier. A young woman had bought the exact anesthetic along with syringes. She explained it was for an animal. That woman was Kim Sung-jae's girlfriend. The case shifted from confusion to accusation. Prosecutors argued motive. Kim was rising. His career was accelerating. There were reports of tension. Possessiveness. Fear of abandonment. The classic pattern that appears when one life outgrows another. The prosecution painted a picture of obsession turning destructive. The first trial ended with a conviction. The court accepted the forensic logic. The needle marks. The drug source. The timing. A severe sentence was handed down. The nation reacted with shock. Some felt justice had been served. Others felt something was missing. Then came the appeal. Defense attorneys focused on what was not there. No fingerprints on the syringes. No bottle recovered. No direct witness to the act. They questioned the size of the needle marks. They questioned the timeline. They suggested alternative scenarios without fully explaining them. Doubt was introduced piece by piece. The appellate court overturned the conviction. The reason was not innocence proven. It was insufficient physical evidence. The girlfriend walked free. For Kim Sung-jae's family, the ruling felt like erasure. Their son had been found with undeniable physical anomalies, yet the system closed the door. They did not stop. For decades, they asked the same questions. Who injected him? Why so many times? Why this drug? Why was the scene left unresolved? Public interest never fully faded. Each anniversary brought renewed discussion. Television programs attempted to revisit the case. Documents were prepared. Interviews were scheduled. Almost every time, broadcasts were halted. Legal challenges stopped episodes from airing. Injunctions were filed. Privacy was cited. Time passed. The case froze in place. The unanswered questions became heavier than the verdict. Why inject 28 times when a much smaller amount would be enough? Some experts suggested panic. Others suggested rage. A third theory emerged that the number itself was deliberate. A way to create chaos. To confuse investigators. To make the scene look like self-harm or substance misuse rather than a calculated act. Nothing could fully explain the choice. Kim Sung-jae became a symbol of something larger than one death. He represented the fragility of early fame in an industry still learning how to protect its stars. His image remained youthful forever. His performances replayed without aging. His voice never cracked with time. He was locked in a moment he never chose. The legal principle that prevented retrial sealed the story permanently. Northwest New Court. No second chance. Truth and verdict drifted apart. One lived in paperwork. The other lived in public memory. Today, the case exists in fragments. Medical reports. Court transcripts. Interviews never aired. A mother who never stopped speaking. A song that still plays on music shows with an unspoken weight behind it. This is not a story of closure. It is a story of limits. Limits of law. Limits of proof. Limits of what a system can admit when certainty is incomplete. As you reflect on this case, consider which detail troubles you the most and why it refuses to settle. The next part leaves the courtroom behind and enters the world of hip-hop power struggles, where illness itself becomes the suspected weapon. Part 4, Eazy-E. Los Angeles in the mid-1990s was tense and loud. Power shifted behind studio doors and inside boardrooms as much as it did on the streets. Eric Wright stood at the center of that pressure. Known to the world as Eazy-E, he was not only a performer. He was an architect. He built a label from nothing, pushed a sound that terrified institutions, and turned raw street narratives into a business empire. He survived violence, police attention, and internal betrayals. He believed himself untouchable. The war was not subtle. Record labels clashed over contracts and control. Former partners became rivals. Loyalty fractured under money and influence. Lawsuits replaced friendships. Threats were whispered rather than shouted. Eazy-E controlled masters and contracts that others desperately wanted released. The pressure around him was constant, but it looked like business as usual to the outside world. Then his body began to fail. It started quietly. A cough. Shortness of breath. Fatigue. Nothing dramatic. He entered the hospital believing it was a routine issue. Asthma. Bronchitis. Something treatable. Within days, doctors delivered a diagnosis that stunned everyone. He was told he had advanced immune failure linked to HIV. Not early infection. Not manageable decline. Full collapse. The timeline shocked medical professionals and the public alike. From first symptoms to death took days, not years. 11 days after admission, Eazy-E was gone. Official statements called it complications from AIDS. Fans struggled to process it. This was not how the illness usually unfolded. In that era, people lived for long periods before reaching that stage. The speed raised quiet questions. Those questions did not disappear. Family members spoke openly. They stated that none of his partners had tested positive. He had children with multiple women. No pattern of transmission appeared. Doctors explained that this was possible, but statistically rare. The gap between medical explanation and lived reality widened. A theory formed in that space. What if the infection was not acquired through intimacy? What if it was introduced directly into the bloodstream? What if illness itself became a weapon? The idea sounded extreme, but the context fed it. The industry around Eazy-E was ruthless. Power struggles involved millions. Control of contracts meant future dominance. Violence had already touched this world. Using disease as a method left no obvious trail. No shell casings. No witnesses. Only charts, and charts can be misread. Then a moment on television changed the conversation. Years after Eazy-E's death, Suge Knight appeared on a late-night talk show. He spoke casually about conflict. About consequences. He described a method where someone could be infected deliberately, calling it a slow death that avoided prison. He laughed as he spoke. He referenced Eazy-E by name in the same breath. The studio audience reacted with nervous laughter, unsure whether they were hearing bravado or something else. That clip spread. People replayed it. They analyzed tone and phrasing. Was it a joke? Was it exaggeration? Was it a confession disguised as entertainment? There was no legal follow-up. No investigation reopened. But the damage was done. The idea took root permanently. Those closest to Eazy-E believed it was not coincidence. They believed the speed of his decline pointed to direct exposure. They believed the timing aligned with peak industry conflict. They believed someone had motive and access. They believed the absence of traditional evidence was part of the design. Critics pushed back. They argued that disease does not need conspiracy. That risky behavior explains outcomes. That grief seeks patterns where none exist. They warned against turning tragedy into myth. Yet even skeptics admitted the timeline was unusual. The case sits in a gray zone. Medical records show a virus. Power dynamics show hostility. One explains the mechanism. The other explains the motive. Between them lies uncertainty. Eazy-E's death altered the culture. It ended an era. Leadership shifted. Labels changed direction. Former rivals gained ground. The absence of one man reshaped the map. His voice disappeared, but his catalog continued to sell. His image froze in time. The idea of illness as a weapon terrifies because it erases the line between health and harm. It turns care into suspicion. It hides intent behind biology. If true, it represents a form of violence that leaves no visible wound. If false, it shows how power and fear can rewrite memory. What remains undeniable is this. A man walked into a hospital expecting treatment and never walked out. A titan fell without a fight. The official story closed quickly. The unofficial story never closed at all. This chapter forces a difficult distinction. A death can be medically explained and still feel strategically timed. A diagnosis can be accurate and still incomplete in meaning. Power does not always need force to destroy. As you weigh this story, consider whether speed alone changes how you interpret responsibility. The next part moves backward in time to Europe, where a genius was slowly undone by what he consumed every day. Part 5, Ludwig van Beethoven. Vienna in the 19th century was elegant on the surface and brutal underneath. Candlelight, salons, and orchestras existed alongside filth, poor medicine, and chemical ignorance. Ludwig van Beethoven lived inside that contradiction. He was celebrated while suffering. Admired while decaying. His story is not only about genius. It is about slow poisoning that unfolded over decades, unnoticed by those closest to him. Beethoven did not lose his hearing suddenly. It began as a whisper. A ringing that never stopped. A buzzing that invaded silence. Over time, sound faded into distortion, then vanished completely. For a composer, this was a private horror. He hid it. He wrote letters begging friends to speak softly. He withdrew from society. Anger and paranoia grew as isolation deepened. Deafness was only the most visible wound. His body was failing everywhere else. He suffered relentless abdominal pain. Cramping that left him doubled over. Digestive chaos that made eating a gamble. He experienced severe mood swings, depression, and explosive rage. His skin often appeared yellowed. His limbs swelled. He complained of headaches and exhaustion that never lifted. Modern doctors looking back recognize a pattern. These are not random ailments. They are classic signs of chronic heavy metal exposure attacking the nervous system and organs over time. For centuries, historians blamed fate. Bad genes. Infection. Lifestyle. The truth remained hidden until science caught up with history. The breakthrough came from something small and intimate. A lock of hair. In Beethoven's time, admirers often kept strands of famous figures as keepsakes. One such lock survived. Preserved. Passed down. Eventually authenticated and tested with modern technology. The results were staggering. The hair contained lead levels hundreds of times higher than what the human body can safely tolerate. Not mild exposure. Not accidental contact. This was long-term saturation. Beethoven had been ingesting lead regularly for years. The question shifted from if to how. Wine was the first suspect. Beethoven loved wine. He drank it daily. In that era, cheap wine was often treated with lead acetate to improve taste. The compound made sour wine sweeter and smoother. It was illegal but common. Consumers had no way of knowing. Beethoven drank wine to relax and to dull pain, unaware that each glass was feeding the toxin destroying him. This created a vicious loop. The more pain he felt, the more he drank. The more he drank, the more poison accumulated. Lead builds slowly. It lodges in bones and organs. It does not leave easily. Over time, it attacks hearing, cognition, mood, and digestion. Beethoven was unknowingly medicating himself with the very substance that was killing him. Wine was not the only source. Medical treatment in the 19th century often caused more harm than disease. Doctors prescribed compounds now known to be dangerous. Lead-based preparations were common remedies for inflammation and pain. Beethoven underwent repeated treatments for swelling and abdominal distress. Records suggest procedures that likely introduced additional lead directly into his system. In attempting to save him, his physicians may have accelerated his decline. No malice was required. Only ignorance. From this poisoned body came music that shocked the world. As his hearing disappeared, his compositions grew more violent, more emotional, more internal. The polite structures of classical music began to fracture. Themes became darker. Rhythms more aggressive. Silence itself became part of the score. Many scholars believe his isolation forced him inward, creating a new musical language born from struggle rather than performance. The irony is brutal. The same toxin that destroyed his senses may have shaped his art. As lead damaged his brain, it amplified volatility and intensity. Emotional extremes sharpened expression. Pain translated into sound. What the poison took from his ears, it may have poured into his imagination. This does not glorify suffering. It reveals how closely creativity and damage can intertwine when the mind is under assault. Beethoven's final years were agony. He was swollen with fluid. His skin stretched tight. He endured invasive procedures without anesthesia. Yet he continued to compose. He wrote music he would never hear. He communicated through notebooks, watching others speak while he lived in silence. On his deathbed during a storm, witnesses described him raising his fist as thunder rolled. Whether defiance or reflex, the image endures. An autopsy revealed severe liver damage consistent with chronic poisoning. The puzzle pieces finally aligned centuries later. Deafness. Pain. Rage. Isolation. All traced back to an element hidden in his daily life. Beethoven was not murdered by a person. He was undone by a culture that did not understand what it consumed. A society that sweetened wine with poison. A medical system that treated illness with toxic cures. He was a victim of progress that had not yet learned its own dangers. His story forces an uncomfortable reflection. How many other historical figures suffered similar fates without explanation? How many minds were altered by substances mistaken for remedies? How often brilliance survived despite poisoning rather than because of it? The legacy remains complicated. We celebrate the music. We rarely confront the cost. Beethoven is remembered as a gruff genius. He should also be remembered as a man fighting a neurotoxin every day of his adult life. As you think about this story, ask yourself whether knowledge of his poisoning changes how you hear his music. The next chapter leaves Vienna and travels east, where honor and secrecy pushed another composer toward a far darker ending. Part 6, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. St. Petersburg in the final autumn of the 19th century moved under a veil of etiquette and fear. Appearances ruled everything. Reputation outweighed truth. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky lived at the center of that world as its most celebrated musical voice and its most vulnerable secret keeper. He carried fame, state honors, and private terror at the same time. The official record says he died of cholera. The story presented to the public was simple. An epidemic spread through the city. Tchaikovsky, careless and thirsty, drank unboiled water at a restaurant despite warnings. Within days he fell violently ill. Doctors diagnosed cholera. He declined quickly. He died surrounded by family. The nation mourned a tragic accident. The file was closed. The details never settled. Tchaikovsky was known as a cautious man. He feared illness. He avoided risks. During outbreaks, he followed rules obsessively. The idea that he would suddenly ignore every instinct and drink unsafe water during an epidemic strains credibility. This single act became the hinge on which the entire explanation rested. Behind the public narrative stood a private crisis. Letters circulated among powerful men. One letter in particular allegedly accused Tchaikovsky of improper attention toward a young nobleman. Whether the accusation was true mattered less than its destination. If it reached the highest authority, the consequences would have been devastating. Exile. Public disgrace. The erasure of a national icon. For a society obsessed with honor, this was intolerable. A solution was chosen. Accounts from historians suggest a secret court of honor was convened. Former classmates. Influential peers. Men bound by shared status and fear of scandal. They summoned Tchaikovsky. They presented him with the reality. Exposure or silence. Survival through disgrace or death through obedience. This was not a legal proceeding. It was a social verdict. The choice was cruelly narrow. Exile would have destroyed his family and his legacy. Silence required sacrifice. The method needed to protect the public image of institutions and individuals alike. Disease offered cover. Poison that mimicked disease offered certainty. Arsenic was known for this purpose. It produces symptoms similar to cholera. Severe gastrointestinal distress. Dehydration. Organ failure. To an untrained eye, the difference is invisible. To a society eager to move on, it was perfect. Tchaikovsky allegedly complied. What followed raises further questions. Cholera victims were typically sealed in coffins immediately to prevent contagion. Tchaikovsky's body was displayed. Visitors approached freely. Hands were kissed. Faces were touched. No quarantines were enforced. Authorities allowed public farewells. This alone contradicts standard protocol for a deadly infectious disease. His brother Modest managed the narrative. He insisted on the official cause. He controlled access to information. He shaped memory. Whether he acted out of loyalty or fear remains debated. 9 days before his death, Tchaikovsky premiered his Sixth Symphony. The work defied convention. Instead of triumph, it ended in darkness. The music sinks rather than rises. The final movement fades into exhaustion and silence. Many listeners describe it as a requiem written by a man who knew the end was near. He called it pathetic. After his death, audiences heard it differently. Not as innovation, but as farewell. Each descending line sounded intentional. Each unresolved phrase felt like acceptance. If the court of honor theory is true, this symphony becomes more than music. It becomes a coded goodbye. The composer did not fight publicly. He did not accuse. He did not flee. He complied with a system that valued image over life. His obedience preserved the illusion of moral order at the cost of truth. For decades, discussion of forced death was suppressed. The state needed a hero without complication. His music became cultural property. His private suffering was erased. Only when archives opened did alternative narratives reappear. The debate continues because certainty is impossible. No chemical proof remains. No confession exists. Only inconsistencies, protocols ignored, and motives that align too neatly to dismiss. This story is not only about one man. It is about a society willing to destroy its greatest artist to protect decorum. It is about power that hides behind manners. It is about silence enforced through fear. Tchaikovsky gave the world beauty rooted in vulnerability. He lived in a time that punished vulnerability without mercy. If he chose death under pressure, it was not weakness. It was the final performance demanded by an unforgiving audience. As you reflect on this chapter, consider whether reputation can ever justify such a price. The next part moves forward into modern times, where control, money, and age collide around a blues legend in his final days. Part 7, B.B. King. Las Vegas in the middle of the second decade of the new century was loud and bright, but inside a quiet house lived a man whose world had narrowed to a bedroom and a chair. B.B. King was no longer the tireless performer who crossed continents with his guitar. Age had slowed him. Illness had weakened him. Yet his name still carried enormous value. His catalog earned money. His image sold history. His estate was worth millions. That combination made his final years fragile. B.B. King depended on others for daily care and financial decisions. Legal documents granted authority to his longtime manager. Power of attorney shifted control from the artist to a gatekeeper. Access became regulated. Phone calls were screened. Visits required permission. Family members described being pushed away, told their presence was disruptive, told rest was more important than connection. Isolation does not always look violent. Sometimes it looks orderly. Daughters later said they noticed changes. Their father appeared confused. His eyes seemed distant. His speech slowed. They described moments when he did not recognize familiar faces. These symptoms were explained as age and illness. diabetes, heart disease, cognitive decline. All plausible. All common in the elderly. What disturbed them was not only his condition, but the environment around him. They alleged that during visits they witnessed substances being placed on his tongue. Liquid drops not clearly identified as prescribed medication. Drops administered casually, without explanation. To the daughters, this crossed a line. Care became suspicion. Trust fractured. They believed motive was simple. Control of the estate. Control of timing. A death that occurred sooner rather than later would lock in financial outcomes. Wills would not change. Questions would stop. These accusations exploded into public view after B.B. King died. He passed away quietly in his sleep. Official reports listed natural causes related to existing medical conditions. There was no immediate scandal. Tributes flooded media. Fans mourned a legend. Then his daughters intervened. They demanded an investigation. They filed affidavits claiming wrongdoing. They asked for an autopsy despite his advanced age. The request alone was unusual. Authorities agreed to examine the body. Toxicology tests were performed. Standard panels searched for known poisons and controlled substances. The results came back negative. No evidence of toxic agents was found. The official cause of death remained unchanged. Legally, the matter ended. Emotionally, it did not. The daughters rejected the conclusion. They argued that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. They questioned the limits of testing. Not every harmful substance appears on routine screens. Some compounds mimic natural decline. Others leave the body quickly. Still others operate through mismanagement of existing conditions rather than introducing foreign chemicals. The idea of harm through neglect or manipulation entered the discussion. Improper insulin use. Medication timing. Dehydration. Sedation. None of these require exotic toxins. They require control. This reframed the story. The question shifted from poisoning to power. Elder abuse does not always involve force. It often involves dependency. When a person cannot advocate for themselves, decisions become opaque. Financial guardianship can protect or exploit. The difference depends entirely on ethics behind closed doors. After his death, a legal war erupted. Accusations flew in both directions. Family members accused management of misconduct. Management accused family of greed. Lawyers took over. Documents were examined. Accounts frozen. Jewelry and personal items reportedly missing. The house became a battlefield of claims rather than a place of mourning. Public opinion split. Some believed the daughters were desperate and grieving. Others believed they were telling a truth no one wanted to hear. B.B. King himself could no longer clarify. His voice, which once commanded rooms, was silent. The system sided with paperwork. Legal authority had been properly granted. No crime was proven. The investigation closed. Yet discomfort lingered. Stories like this repeat across the entertainment world. Aging icons surrounded by people who manage their money and their lives. Families pushed aside. Decisions made in the name of care. When death arrives, questions surface too late to answer. B.B. King spent his life singing about loss and betrayal. In his final chapter, those themes returned in real form. Not as music, but as conflict over his body and his legacy. His death was lawful. That does not mean it was peaceful. A man who played for presidents and crowds of thousands died amid distrust and division. The guitar fell silent, but arguments grew louder. His story serves as a warning about what happens when fame outlives strength. As you think about this case, consider where the line should be drawn between care and control. The next part travels back centuries to examine the death of a prodigy whose final words still echo with suspicion. Part 8, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Vienna in the winter of 1791 was cold, crowded, and uneasy. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was only in his 30s, yet his body was already betraying him. He complained of exhaustion that never lifted. His limbs swelled. His skin stretched tight. Pain followed him from morning to night. What frightened him most was not the pain itself, but the certainty forming in his mind. He told those close to him that he had been poisoned. He did not speak vaguely. He named the poison. Aqua tofana was not a fantasy. It was a real substance, infamous across Europe. A slow-acting mixture associated with arsenic and other toxic elements. It was designed to kill gradually, mimicking natural illness. Victims weakened day by day, often believing they were dying of fever or organ failure. The poison allowed the cause of death to hide in plain sight. Mozart believed this was what was happening to him. His symptoms were consistent with that belief. Severe swelling across the body. Intense pain. Repeated vomiting. Profound fatigue. He felt his strength draining in a way that felt calculated rather than random. He told his wife Constance that his death had been scheduled, that someone had measured the time it would take. These were not the words of a man calmly accepting fate. They were the words of someone sensing an external threat. At the same time, Mozart was under immense pressure. Financial stress weighed heavily on him. Commissions came and went. Patrons delayed payments. He worked relentlessly, often through illness, driven by fear of falling behind. His final major project was a funeral mass. The Requiem. It was commissioned anonymously by a mysterious figure dressed in gray. The secrecy disturbed him. He became convinced he was writing the piece for himself. He worked obsessively, even as his condition worsened. Friends described him dictating music from his bed, breath shallow, face swollen. He could no longer sit comfortably. Yet the music continued. Dark. Heavy. Unresolved. The Requiem became a race against his own body. As his health collapsed, rumors gathered speed. One theory focused on Antonio Salieri, a respected composer and court musician. Popular culture later framed him as a jealous rival, unable to tolerate Mozart's effortless genius. Stories circulated of envy turning poisonous. Years after Mozart's death, Salieri allegedly confessed during a period of mental decline, then retracted the confession. Historians remain divided. Many argue the rivalry was exaggerated, that Salieri had little to gain from Mozart's death. Yet the rumor persisted because it fit a narrative people wanted to believe. Genius destroyed by envy. Another theory pointed towards secret societies. Mozart was a Freemason. His final opera, The Magic Flute, contained heavy symbolism tied to initiation, trials, and enlightenment. Some believed he revealed too much. That he broke codes meant to remain hidden. According to this theory, punishment followed. Poison delivered quietly. Death staged as illness. No proof supports this claim. No documents. No confessions. Only coincidence and interpretation. The physical reality of his death remains undeniable. In his final days, Mozart could barely move. His body was so swollen that clothing no longer fit. He remained conscious, aware of his decline, until near the end. He died with music unfinished. The Requiem stopped mid-sentence. Silence replaced sound. After his death, his treatment defied expectations for a man of his stature. Mozart was buried in a common grave. No marked location. No individual headstone. Weather was blamed. Custom was cited. Yet the result was permanent erasure of physical evidence. No remains to examine. No bones to test. No definitive answers. This absence fuels the mystery. Unlike Beethoven, there is no hair sample conclusively linked to Mozart. No preserved tissue. No reliable autopsy. Medicine of the time recorded little detail. All that remains are letters, accounts, and speculation. Some modern doctors propose alternative explanations. Kidney failure. Rheumatic fever. Infection. These conditions could cause swelling and pain. They could explain death without poison. Yet they do not explain Mozart's certainty. They do not explain why he named a specific toxin known for slow execution. Was he paranoid? Exhausted? Overworked? A dying mind searching for meaning? Or was he correct? The line between genius and vulnerability is thin. Mozart's sensitivity may have heightened awareness of his body. He felt changes others might ignore. When something went wrong, he trusted his intuition. History cannot verify his fear. It also cannot dismiss it. Mozart's death remains suspended between explanation and doubt. A man who transformed music died believing he had been targeted. The truth vanished with his body into an unmarked grave. What survives is his work. Over 600 compositions. Joy, sorrow, humor, terror. A life compressed into sound. A death that refuses to be fully understood. As you consider this story, ask yourself whether Mozart's conviction deserves belief or caution. The next part leaves Europe behind and enters a modern university dorm where envy took a far more traceable form. Part 9, Zhu Ling. Beijing in the mid-1990s was defined by ambition and discipline. Elite universities promised upward mobility to the brightest students. Zhu Ling belonged to that promise. She was gifted in chemistry and deeply devoted to music. She practiced the guqin with precision and patience, balancing scientific rigor with artistic sensitivity. Her future appeared structured and secure. Then her body began to fail in ways no one understood. Her hair started falling out in clumps. Strength drained from her limbs. Pain spread through her muscles and nerves. Walking became difficult. Speaking turned labored. Doctors moved from clinic to clinic, unable to explain the pattern. Tests came back inconclusive. Treatments failed. Weeks turned into months. Her condition worsened. At that time, advanced diagnostic tools were limited. Yet something unusual happened. Friends and family turned to the internet, still young and unregulated. They posted Zhu Ling's symptoms to online forums. Chemists from around the world read the descriptions. One element surfaced repeatedly in their responses. Thallium. Thallium is not a common household substance. It is a heavy metal once used in laboratories and industry. It causes hair loss, neurological damage, paralysis, and intense pain. Exposure can be fatal. It is tasteless and difficult to detect. The match was terrifyingly precise. Doctors confirmed it. Zhu Ling had been poisoned. Not once. Twice. The source narrowed quickly. Thallium was not freely available. Access was restricted to specific laboratories. Only a small group of students and staff could obtain it. The list was short. Among them was Zhu Ling's roommate. Investigators questioned the roommate. Reports indicated jealousy and tension. Both were talented. Both competed academically. The environment was intense. Small resentments could grow quietly. The police searched belongings, but critical time had already passed. Evidence may have been removed. Items were missing from the dorm room. Personal containers disappeared. The trail cooled rapidly. Then the investigation stopped. No formal explanation was given. No charges were filed. The case stalled without resolution. The suspect continued her studies. Later reports suggested she left the country. The reason for the halt was never officially stated, but rumors circulated. Powerful family connections. Political influence. Quiet phone calls. In that system, silence often signaled protection. Zhu Ling survived, but survival came at a terrible cost. The poisoning left her severely disabled. Brain damage impaired speech. Movement required assistance. Music, once central to her identity, became impossible to perform. Her parents became full-time caregivers. Their lives narrowed to routines of care, therapy, and waiting. Years passed. Decades passed. Justice did not arrive. Public memory refused to fade. Each year, online communities revisited the case. New generations learned her name. Investigative essays circulated. Amateur sleuths compiled timelines. The suspect's name followed her across borders. Petitions were filed. Universities were questioned. Authorities remained silent. The internet that helped save Zhu Ling's life became the place where her case lived on. It was remembered, analyzed, and argued long after official channels closed. Zhu Ling lived in a state often described as living death. She was conscious. She recognized people. She felt pain. Yet her independence was gone. Her parents aged caring for a daughter who would never recover. Every milestone became a reminder of what had been taken. In late 2023, she died. Her death reignited outrage. Messages flooded forums. Old evidence resurfaced. Calls for accountability grew louder. Many believed the case had already been solved by logic if not by law. Access. Motive. Opportunity. The pieces aligned too neatly to ignore. Yet alignment is not conviction. This is where the case stands. A crime understood by the public but untouched by the courts. A life destroyed without legal consequence. A system that diagnosed the poison yet refused to confront the poisoner. Zhu Ling's story exposes a different kind of violence. Not impulsive. Not loud. Calculated and intellectual. Someone with scientific knowledge used that knowledge to harm. Someone trusted access and proximity. Someone relied on protection after the act. The silence that followed was as damaging as the poison itself. This case forces an uncomfortable truth. Justice depends not only on evidence but on power. When power intervenes, truth can be suspended indefinitely. Zhu Ling became a symbol of that imbalance. She was not a celebrity. She was not wealthy. She was brilliant, kind, and ordinary in the most human sense. Her suffering became a lesson written into digital memory rather than legal precedent. As you think about her story, consider whether public judgment can ever replace formal justice. The final part moves to a dim hotel room in New Orleans, where a punk legend met an ending shaped by trust and betrayal. Part 10, Johnny Thunders. New Orleans in the early 1990s carried a heavy mix of music, humidity, and risk. Johnny Thunders arrived there as a survivor. Decades of chaos had not taken him. Punk had not taken him. Excess had not taken him. He was thin, worn, and still standing. He was trying to stabilize his life using a methadone program, a structured attempt to step away from the spiral that had defined his image for years. He checked into a small hotel with cash on him and plans ahead of him. Johnny was not a naive man. He understood danger. Yet familiarity can dull caution. In New Orleans, he crossed paths with people he did not know well. Travelers. Drinkers. Faces that appear friendly in dim bars. Accounts place him socializing late into the night, sharing drinks and stories. Nothing about it looked unusual. This was how he had lived for years. The difference was what happened afterward. The next morning, hotel staff entered the room and found Johnny Thunders dead. His body was not relaxed. It was twisted tightly beneath a table, locked in a rigid position that suggested intense physical distress. The room had been disturbed. Personal items were missing. Cash was gone. Most notably, his methadone supply was gone. This detail matters. Methadone is not casual medication. For someone in recovery, it is essential. It is guarded. Losing it is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis. The idea that Johnny misplaced it strains belief. The idea that someone took it fits the scene far better. Toxicology added another layer. Methadone was present, as expected. But so was LSD. That combination raised eyebrows. Johnny was known for certain habits, but this pairing did not align with his recent behavior. Friends insisted he was focused on staying functional. Mixing substances that pull the body in opposite directions made little sense for someone trying to maintain balance. The term hot shot began to circulate. In street language, a hot shot refers to a dose deliberately altered to overwhelm or incapacitate the user. The motive is often theft. Once the victim is incapacitated, belongings are taken. The dose does not need to be lethal. Death becomes collateral. The physical state of Johnny's body supports this theory. He was not found peacefully. Rigor had locked him into a posture that suggested extreme distress. This does not match the stereotype of a quiet overdose. It suggests convulsions or severe reaction. Something went wrong fast. Police did not pursue the possibility deeply. The conclusion was simple. Accidental overdose. Case closed. To them, Johnny Thunders fit a familiar category. A musician with a history. A known lifestyle. A convenient explanation. That convenience is the heart of the controversy. When a person carries a reputation, investigation often stops early. Missing items become background noise. Unusual toxicology becomes irrelevant. Context overrides evidence. This pattern repeats across cities and decades. Certain lives are treated as disposable once they fall outside respectability. Johnny Thunders was not treated as a victim of a crime. He was treated as a predictable outcome. Friends and family pushed back. They argued that Johnny had money and plans. He was not spiraling. He was not isolated. The missing methadone mattered. The presence of unfamiliar substances mattered. The condition of the room mattered. Nothing changed. No suspects were identified. No one was questioned seriously. The two men reportedly seen with him the night before were never located. The trail ended where it began. Johnny's death became a footnote. This ending stands in contrast to his cultural impact. He shaped punk guitar tone. He influenced bands that defined generations. He lived recklessly, yes, but he also lived creatively. His final chapter did not match the mythology people expected. The idea that his death was brushed aside because of his past raises uncomfortable questions. Does recovery erase history, or does history erase recovery? Can someone ever escape the assumptions attached to their image? Johnny Thunders died in a city known for music and mystery. His death joined a long list of cases where context replaced inquiry. The theft points to motive. The altered dose points to intent. The lack of follow-up points to indifference. This is not a story about innocence or guilt. It is a story about attention. About which deaths are examined closely and which are dismissed quickly. About how labels can shape outcomes long after behavior changes. Johnny spent years fighting the image that defined him. In the end, that image may have prevented anyone from asking harder questions. He played guitar like he was burning time. He survived long enough to want something different. He did not survive long enough to be taken seriously. As you sit with this final case, consider whether a person's past should determine how their final moments are judged. What follows is a moment to step back and look at the pattern across all these stories, where silence, power, and assumption decide whose truth is allowed to surface.